Pat McGuigan's here again joining us. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Of course.
So Governor-elect Mary Fallin is making some of her choices for her transition team. What are these choices saying about her?
They're very interesting. It's, I think the two words would be competent and conservative. The other day, just before Thanksgiving, she named Phyllis Hudecki as her Cabinet Secretary of Education. Hudecki is first-rate choice, business education coalition, very close ties to the business community, but a lot of credentials and experience in education. Before her current line of work at the BEC, she for quite a while was involved in the equivalent of career tech in other states. Vocational technical education is part of her background. And what she brings to the table is close ties to the existing public school structure and to the business community. So she's a very good bridge between the public sector and the private sector, which you don't always get. You get somebody that might be competent in one or the other. So Hudecki is a very good choice. Rita Aragon, since the last time I talked about cabinet appointments or nominations, Rita Aragon, who was the first woman to run a National Guard unit in the United States here in Oklahoma and who worked at the Pentagon on active duty for many years. She's been named Cabinet Secretary of Veterans Affairs, which brings me to something. You have Hudecki and Aragon, and then you have three other interesting selections. Denise Northrup as her Chief of Staff, Judy Copeland to do legal work for the Governor-elect, and then Katie Altshuler, who's very experienced House staffer, to help on administrative issues. So what you've got is a nice feminine touch so far to the Fallin selections, and these are all quality, first-rate people. There's nothing that could be described as affirmative action about the choices. It's just simply good choices. And racing through a couple of others that we've talked about previously, Bob Sullivan, the Tulsa businessman, David Rainbolt, a banker, Gary Shearer, experienced with the David Walters administration in agriculture issues, Jim Reese, coming on board as the Ag Secretary, Todd Lamb for small business in addition to his Lieutenant Governor portfolio, mirroring in that regard what Fallin did for former Governor Keating, and finally Alex Wentz, that a lot of us in the News Corps know because of his work during the campaign, a very professional stand-up guy as her press secretary. So a very good mix, I think, so far. I'd have to give her a, an A.
All right, we'll see how that goes, and if some of those people stay on it as this continues. Now, switching gears to something else, the SoonerPoll actually came out with some interesting results about teacher unions.
Yeah, it was pretty startling. 55.4% of Oklahomans, according to the SoonerPoll that was taken right after the election, believe that labor unions, teacher labor unions, are an impediment to making Oklahoma schools better. Now that's a high number, but it's not dramatically different. Just to give it some cross-referencing, it's not dramatically different than a poll taken in the summer for Time magazine, which found that half of Americans think that. Only a minority believe that teacher unions help make schools better. One more little piece on that in the Oklahoma polls, the SoonerPoll, 2/3 of Republicans and half of Democrats agree with that proposition that the labor unions are an impediment to making schools better. I think you add that on top of the results of State Question 744, the Oklahoma Education Association has some problems of reaching the broad audience of Oklahomans who, after all, make a lot of the ultimate decisions. One little caveat on that is that the American Federation of Teachers, which is really strong in Oklahoma City and not so strong in the rest of the state, but the AFT, which is explicitly a union, AFL-CIO, they oppose 744, and they've been more open to elements of school choice in the urban areas and to other reforms, and that might put a wrinkle in all of this in terms of the AFT's ability to appeal perhaps more broadly than the NEA/OEA has traditionally.
Now, that's not the only poll that we heard about. Also, Saxum came out with a poll, another poll showing that Oklahomans are pretty proud of what we stand for.
Yeah, Renzai Stone, I've known for many years, Saxum PR has certainly become a force in Oklahoma, and they commissioned their own poll to study this proposition of, are we the reddest of the red states, to use the national analogy? And if so, how do you feel about that? Well, here's what people said. 74% of Republicans and 37% of Democrats said, that's fine, that's nice, that's a good place for us to be. I'm paraphrasing from the actual language of the poll, of course. On policy matters, also interesting, an absolute majority want to see repeal or dramatic change, at least in health care at the national level. An interesting wrinkle is that all of the subsets had more confidence in local people than in the national people. Here's what I mean by that. Republicans even had a slightly better view of the local or state Democratic Party than they did of the national, and vice versa. On the other side, Democrats had a somewhat better review of local Republicans than they do of national. So as polarized as we are, which is a real challenge when you develop policy, that's actually kind of interesting. Now, it was a minority in both cases, but it's kind of an interesting coloration on the results. In terms of a couple more policy things, there's an even split right down the middle on whether or not there should be further state income taxes. There was a division on whether to do targeted cuts of agencies to meet this budget shortfall or across the board. And across the board is a little closer to the approach that they've taken the last 2 years. Interestingly enough, you can sometimes win by losing, or at least win on pieces. And Jerry Askins might be gratified to learn, if she hasn't already, that in that poll, 60% of Oklahomans endorse her idea of every other year having a budget session focused solely, a legislative session focused solely on budget issues, mirroring what they do in a few other states. So those are some of the things in the news lately in the polling side, and I think that pride in being the reddest of the red is kind of interesting because, of course, nationally there's an effort on the part of some people to kind of sneer at Oklahoma for being so conservative in this past election.
You think as lawmakers are looking toward what to do this next session that they'll pay attention to these polls and maybe follow what people are saying?
Oh, it'll depend on, as you know, saliency or intensity of feeling. I haven't studied the crosstabs to know how intense the feelings are. I think there will be some attention paid to that. The question will be how it affects perhaps more than anything, the Democratic leaders in the legislature, who are still a force. They don't have the ability to stop a lot, but they can certainly have the ability to slow things down. So how they internalize those numbers could be significant.
Okay, thank you so much, Pat. Always so interesting. And you can check out Pat's website, his news site online. It's CapitolBeatOK.com, and we'll see you again next week.